Usually after you finish a horror film, you can take a deep sigh of relief knowing that it was all just a movie, nobody really died, and ghosts aren't real. Or at least, we hope they aren't. These films have more than just skeletons in their closets, with a range of little-known details and on-set accidents that make them creepy on a whole new level. So without further ado, I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 10 secret details that make horror movies even creepier. 10. The inspiration is all too real. HOSTEL. HOSTEL is one of the most infamous torture porn type horrors out there, and it may upset you to know that director Eli Roth got his inspiration from a real-life pay-to-kill organization. In an interview with Dread Central, Roth explained that a friend showed him a website where, for $10,000, you could go to an organized location and just shoot someone in the head. This particular site claimed that the would-be victims chose to do it because they were going to die anyway, and part of the $10,000 fee would be going to their struggling families. But there's no doubt there's even worse sites out there where some people don't get the privilege of consenting to their own execution. There are plenty of rumors about so-called red rooms on the dark web, and how you can pay to have someone torture a captive via livestream. None of these are substantiated rumors, mind, but they're not totally unbelievable. So it is very possible that somewhere in the world a real-life hostel exists, and doesn't that just sound like the most horrifying thing in the world? 9. The book's underrated killer tactic. It. Pennywise is a master of all things horrible, so when I tell you that a secret trick of his is to change the colour of his eyes, you may roll yours. In the scale of things, this really isn't the scariest thing he's capable of. However, when we see him luring Georgie into the storm drain, his eyes switch from an ominous yellow to a less intimidating shade of blue, and the reason for this is incredibly smart. It's a direct reference to Stephen King's original novel, in which Georgie first kind of fears Pennywise and consequently may not have approached him, with King describing the yellow as the sort of eyes he had always imagined but never actually seen down in the basement. However, just a few lines later, Pennywise gets wise, and King states, "How," Georgie wondered, "could I ever have thought his eyes were yellow? They were a bright, dancing blue, the colour of his mum's eyes, and Bill's." I mean, what a tactic! Using his appearance-changing abilities, he lures children in by making his eyes more familiar and evocative of trusted loved ones. It's a tiny detail, but it translates over so well and so subtly from the novel, and it's proper creepy. 8. The murderer that inspired the film watched it. Memories of Murder. At the time of its release, the killer that inspired Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder had not yet been caught. The film came out in 2003, but it would be another 16 years before the perpetrator of the Waesong serial murders, Lee Chun-jae, admitted to his crimes. Bong Joon-ho believed from the start that the killer would watch his film, leading to the creation of that famous final shot in which Detective Park Do-man breaks the fourth wall to stare directly into the camera. "The person I want to talk to most," Bong said in a panel marking the film's 10-year anniversary, "was the killer himself." Well, according to some sources, he did just that. Whilst it seems impossible to verify if this is true, apparently in his 2019 trial, Lee claimed he had watched Bong's movie and that it made him feel nothing at all. Given the huge audience reach the film gained over the years, it doesn't seem unlikely. Still, to watch all your horrible crimes play out in front of you and not feel a thing is absolutely deranged. 7. The Zodiac killer thought it was hilarious. The Exorcist. The Exorcist is widely regarded as one of the scariest, most unsettling films of all time. For some people, though, watching the movie was a very different experience. In 1974, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter which is widely believed to be from the famous Zodiac killer. In his signature cryptic style, complete with his terrible spelling, he announces that he thinks The Exorcist is the best satirical comedy that he's ever seen. Audience reactions to The Exorcist really varied, with some people claiming it made them vomit or pass out, whilst others, according to this San Francisco Chronicle article, which is actually believed to have prompted the Zodiac response, found it about as scary as Snow White, which is weirdly specific. Whilst it's statistically incredibly likely that one will have seen many movies also viewed by killers, it adds a weird, creepy edge to this horror classic to know that an infamous serial murderer watched the same film we all did, but thought it was absolutely hilarious. 6. The film inspired so many murders. Natural-born killers. It may be a bit of a stretch from crime thriller to horror, but we have to make space for this one on the list as this fact almost moves it into horror territory alone. For the most part, if someone tries to tell me that movies and video games cause violence, I tell them that they're wrong and they should really try leaving the house more often. In this particular instance, however, I may have to renege on that sentiment. There is literally an entire Wikipedia page dedicated only to natural-born killers' copycat crimes. People got it in their heads after watching the movie that murder was glamorous. One 17-year-old even got so obsessed with the character of Mickey that he cut his hair and began dressing like him before going on to shoot his stepmother and half-sister to death in their sleep. Another famous copycat case was that of Ben Darras and Sarah Edmondson, which culminated in legal action being brought against director Oliver Stone and Warner Brothers by one of their victims, Patsy Byers. Byers was left paralysed from the neck down when the duo shot her, and because they'd watched the film on a loop before going on their killing spree, she claimed that the filmmakers had just as much guilt as the perpetrators. Her case didn't end up going anywhere, but there's been dozens of cases in which this movie was a direct motivator of the crimes. 5. The corpses in the pool scene were real skeletons. Poltergeist. Surely you have to do a lot of weird things during a career as an actor, but you usually wouldn't expect sharing a pool with a handful of real decaying skeletons to be one of them. In one scene, Jo Beth Williams as matriarch Diane Freeling falls into a hole in the ground destined to be the family's pool. It begins filling with rainwater, and around her a group of decaying corpses start popping up left, right and centre. Williams already didn't want to film the scene because of the weird atmosphere on set and the few accidents that had already occurred, but after being convinced to get in the water, she was still none the wiser that the skeletons beneath her were not props. It wasn't uncommon at the time to use real human remains on set, often due to costing reasons, but despite this being common practice, Williams didn't find out until after the film wrapped that her poolside pals were very real, with the following years bringing a host of terrible accidents and deaths upon members of the cast and crew. Many people believed that Poltergeist's use of real corpses brought a curse upon the film. Curse or no curse, you still have to admit that unknowingly swimming with a bunch of corpses is very, very creepy. 4. There's a real killer on screen, The Exorcist. This is another film that earned itself a cursed reputation following the deaths of multiple people involved in production before the film was even released. One name you're unlikely to recognise from the cast is that of Paul Bateson, who played a radiology technician in the film but also worked as one in real life. One fateful night after everything was all done with The Exorcist, Bateson met a journalist called Addison Verrill at a bar and the two went back to Verrill's apartment. It was there that Bateson knocked the journalist down and stabbed him to death. He claimed it wasn't a premeditated crime and that it had no link to a group of similar unsolved murders at the time, but there are people who still believe this wasn't his first kill. Serial murderer or one-off killer, it still stands that Bateson's appearance on screen makes things all the more creepy considering how his life would unfold following the film's release. 3. People almost became homicidal on set. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Filming all day in the Texas heat is no easy feat, especially when you're caked in makeup and costume and God knows what else. You can't blame the actors and crew for being driven a little mad by the conditions, but at times a little madness started approaching dangerous territory. The famous dinner scene was filmed on a boiling 110-degree day, with production lights bumping the temperature up even more. Bad ventilation meant that the stench from the rotten food and sweaty bodies made the conditions almost unbearable, and after hours of intense, non-stop filming, some of the cast were becoming delirious. Gunnar Hansen, the OG Leatherface, recalled in the DVD commentary how the cast began embodying their characters in a whole new way, blurring the lines of reality. He notes that for a moment he genuinely desired to kill Marilyn Burns after his in-film brother instructed him to. With a few more hours in those conditions, who knows what could have happened. 2. It was inspired by Guillermo del Toro's own supernatural experience, Crimson Peak. Back when Del Toro was all set to direct the Hobbit trilogy, he and the team went out location scouting in New Zealand. One night they decided to stay in a supposedly haunted hotel, and the events of that night are what he claims inspired his vision for one scene in Crimson Peak. During the night, he claims he heard what sounded like a murder taking place, complete with whimpering, screaming and crying. The sounds were localized to one vent, which on inspection led only to an empty bathroom. This unnerving experience inspired the scene in which Edith sees a spectre in the bathtub, seemingly a reflection of what Toro envisioned seeing when tracking down those sounds. The truth behind what he heard that night will forever remain a mystery, but at least he got something good out of the experience. 1. Quint's shark speech is all true. Jaws. Jaws is full of fantastic iconic scenes, but one of Spielberg's own favourites is the one in which Robert Shaw monologues about the tragic fate of the USS Indianapolis. He tells the story of a World War II ship in peril, its body destroyed, leaving its crew to be eaten alive in the shark-infested waters beneath. It's not just a dramatic story made for screen though. In 1945, the USS Indianapolis really was hit by an enemy bomb which led to the deaths of hundreds of crew members. Those who weren't killed directly by the bomb were left stranded in the water, slowly dying from their injuries, from starvation or dehydration, or from being ripped to shreds by the hungry sharks. One crew member said in an interview for Jaws: The Inside Story, that the sharks would pull the men down and eat their extremities, and the rest of the body would just bob to the surface, which gives quite the mental image. Quint in his monologue claims that over 1,000 men went into the water and only around 300 emerged. And whilst this may be a bit of an exaggeration, it really isn't that far off. The horrors of war were all too real, and if bombs and guns don't scare you, then maybe killer sharks will. And on that note, we've actually reached the end of this list of 10 secret details that make horror movies even creepier. If you can think of any more creepy details, then let us know in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.